Studying Twelfth Night and keen to make extra progress on Act 3, Scenes 2 to 3? Well, you're in the right place. Stay tuned. Schofield on Shakespeare.
Abbiamo il cuore a strisce, portaci dove vuoi.
My usual reminder that you need to have read the scene in full and thought about it before watching this video. If you haven't done that, by God, go and do that now.
Time for my brief summary of Act 3, Scene 2, dear viewers, subscribers, and most of all, pupils. We return to the three drinkers and eavesdroppers, Fabian, Sir Toby and Sir Andrew. The latter is threatening to leave Illyria once and for all, frustrated beyond measure at Olivia ignoring him in favour of that good-looking young upstart Cesario. Fabian abuses reason and logic to claim that Olivia was only favouring Cesario because she wanted to get a response out of Sir Andrew. Sir Toby then intervenes to suggest that Sir Andrew should challenge Cesario to a duel. This is agreed, and Sir Andrew heads off to write the challenge. With Sir Andrew off stage, Sir Toby admits to Fabian and the audience that he has been using him for money and amusement. The scene ends with Maria entering to reveal that Malvolio is making an ass of himself in front of Olivia, and is following her letter's instructions to the letter. How about Act 3, Scene 3? Well, we return to Sebastian and Antonio, last seen by the coast in Act 2, Scene 1. Guess what? They are still together. Antonio couldn't bear the idea of his new friend being alone in strange new territory, and so followed him to the city. Antonio's devotion does not appear to be completely reciprocated. Although Sebastian asks whether Antonio wants to check out the famous buildings and sights of the city with him, he doesn't seem that bothered when the latter reveals that he can't. In the past, he took part in a sea battle against Count Orsino, and has subsequently failed to repay what he took. Desperate to do something to symbolise his devotion, Antonio insists that Sebastian takes his purse for any trinkets which catch his attention. They plan to meet at the Elephant Pub an hour later. Time for you to answer some questions, dear viewers and subscribers. The more you independently write and think about these two questions, the better. This video will resume in 5 seconds time, so press pause now to write your extended responses. Question 1. We already know that Sir Andrew is a coward. How do Fabian and Sir Toby manage to convince him to challenge Cesario to a duel? And how do we in the audience react to this? Well, let me just flesh out Sir Andrew's confirmed cowardice here, especially as many of you may have different editions of the text with slightly different line numbers. Even before he enters on stage, Maria has told us about his cowardice, and she's a pretty sharp cookie, isn't she? A pretty good judge of people. In Act 1, Scene 3, without mincing her words, she tells Sir Toby that, as well as being a fool, Sir Andrew loves to argue for the sake of it, and if he wasn't so good at backing down or running away from his arguments, he'd probably end up dead in his own grave. Sir Andrew himself confirms his own cowardice with his own pathetic attempt at humour in Act 2, Scene 3. Following Malvolio's pompous, indignant ripostes at their late-night drinking and singing, Sir Andrew suggests that it would be hilarious to challenge him to a duel, but not to turn up. Apparently, this would make a fool of him. In Act 3, Scene 2, there is no hint at this stage that Sir Andrew plans to run away from a prospective sword fight with Cesario. So how has this situation come about? Well, it is clear that, as is typical in Twelfth Night, a fast-paced verbal exchange has allowed little time for in-depth reflection, particularly for those whose brains operate at a more sluggish pace. So Toby and Fabian frequently team up to rapidly back each other up, or paraphrase each other, thus putting the pressure on Sir Andrew to justify his decision to escape their claws. I think it's also reasonable to assume that Sir Andrew feels genuine affection for Sir Toby, which is confirmed even more explicitly in Act 5, Scene 1, when he offers to help his wounded friend. "I'll help you, Sir Toby, because we'll be dressed together, only to be painfully and publicly shunned." It also seems to me that he thinks Sir Toby feels affection for him, indicative in the scene through typically over-the-top apparent terms of endearment such as "dear Venom" and "old boy." However, close analysis of an apparent term of endearment such as "dear Venom" might imply that the desire to mock rather than care is Sir Toby's priority. By referring to him as the poisonous liquid of a snake, Sir Toby implies the disproportionateness of his reaction. His temporary anger and bitterness at being overlooked in favour of Cesario has figuratively become his whole character. It simultaneously acknowledges his anger and arguably belittles it. So the joint quick-fire pressure put on Sir Andrew, along with the affection he feels and believes Sir Toby feels for him, contribute to him agreeing to challenge Cesario. Fabian's use of extended twisted logic also plays a key role, coming after even Sir Andrew has gleaned that perhaps he could be being made a fool of. The gist is that Olivia was hoping her apparent favours to Cesario would spark Sir Andrew into life, propel him to show what he was made of, make him come out of his shell to showcase his talents as a witty man of the world. Within Fabian's apparently logical arguments, note the open challenges to Sir Andrew's masculinity, which contribute to the latter making a fool of himself. Just as in Act 1, Scene 3, Sir Toby's call to accost resulted in humiliation. Note here the references to Dormouse Valour, brimstone in your liver, accosted and banged. The phrase Dormouse Valour is oxymoronic and deliberately provocative and belittling, suggesting that Sir Andrew's courage is akin to that of a small mouse is a typical alpha male challenge which demands some kind of reaction, if only a temporary one. Meanwhile, the idea that Olivia was favouring Cesario only to put brimstone, fire and passion in his, Sir Andrew's, liver references the Elizabethan belief that the liver was the place in which passions were fermented. Thus Macbeth can accuse a servant of cowardice and lack of passion by labelling him lily-livered boy. Thus in Act 2, Scene 5 of this play, Fabian can declare that Malvolia's passions have been awakened by the forged letter. This wins him liver and all. And here, the implication is that Sir Andrew's liver is severely lacking, and that he needs to do something about this. Finally, both verbs, accosted and banged, have connotations of forceful sexual thrusting, something Sir Andrew hasn't been doing. By writing the challenge to Cesario, Sir Andrew will be able to show that, by God, he is a proper man.
Time for question 2. Antonio, in The Merchant of Venice, tells Bassanio, "My purse, my person, my extremist means lie all unlocked to your occasions." Research this character. How does he compare to his namesake in Twelfth Night?
Well, let me summarise Antonio's role in The Merchant of Venice. He starts the play feeling melancholy, but apparently doesn't know why. However, he opens up during a conversation with great long-term friend Bassanio, to whom he promises to lend money so that he can try to woo a beautiful rich lady, Portia. The problem is that Antonio doesn't currently have any money to lend. It is all invested in some trading vessels which are currently at sea. He therefore ends up going against past principles by borrowing money from a notorious Jewish moneylender, Shylock, a man he hates both for his religion and his business practices. Intriguingly, Shylock proposes that if Antonio fails to pay back the money, the forfeit should be a pound of his flesh, presumably his heart, and therefore his life. Antonio agrees to this extraordinary clause in spite of Bassanio's alarm. Guess what? Antonio's ships do come a cropper, and so Antonio finds himself in jail. Shylock demands his pound of flesh, and the case goes to court. Eventually, after much tension and moments in which it looks like his flesh is about to be cut open, he is released on a technicality. As a Jewish man, Shylock is an alien outsider. By setting the pound of flesh clause, he has been shown to be seeking the life of a Venetian citizen, something which, according to the law, should result in all his goods being seized and potentially his death. The Jewish Shylock ends up being wretchedly humiliated. The Christian hypocrite Antonio is saved. However, just like Don Pedro in Much Ado About Nothing, Antonio has started the play as a key player, but ended somewhat isolated on the sidelines. So, how do the two Antonios compare? Well, on closer inspection, the similarities are striking. Both Antonios seem extraordinarily devoted to their friends, so much so that they are prepared to take extreme risks. In Act 3, Scene 3 of Twelfth Night, Antonio confirms that his presence in the city, if discovered, is likely to result in significant punishment and imprisonment. Antonio does not give details about how he is likely to be punished for fighting against and plundering Orsino's ships, either here or a few lines later. However, the lack of detail within the adverbial dear, as well as the phrase scarce be answered, seems to imply that the consequences of being caught are sinister. Antonio probably knows this, but doesn't want to draw attention to it, due to his inexplicably selfless and devoted attitude towards Sebastian. In The Merchant of Venice, the consequences of Antonio's devotion are far more explicit. He will have to have a pound of flesh cut from his body, with Shylock being able to choose which part. Knowing Shylock and the abuse he has received from Christians over the years, including Antonio himself, this is unlikely to be a relatively harmless piece of thigh. So although the consequences for both Antonio's selfless devotion are grave, they are clearly worse for Antonio from The Merchant of Venice. But at least he has the justification of having had a long-term friendship with Bassanio. They were school friends together. When at school, Antonio helped Bassanio in a similar way, and the former can declare, "You know me well, and herein spend but time to wind about my love with circumstance." What is a little strange about the Antonio in Twelfth Night is that he has only just met Sebastian. There are no past shared memories, no rosy-tinted time spent together as children, simply the potential ego boost of having saved his life from a shipwreck. So a comparison between the two texts hammers home a point that I've been making repeatedly in these series of videos. There is something extraordinarily magnetic and attractive about Sebastian and Viola. You are affected and drawn to them immediately, whether you realise it or not. And of course it takes Orsino more time than most to appreciate Viola due to his own pathetic self-absorption. And what is the exact nature of Antonio's feelings for Sebastian in Twelfth Night? Chad Allen Thomas's essay, Antonio's Happy Ending, Queer Closure in an All-Male Twelfth Night, makes interesting reading on this score. Whilst quoting numerous critics keen to define the relationship as homoerotic and homosexual, he also provides useful clarification about the nature of friendship as viewed in Shakespeare's time. In other words, same-sex friendships and relationships had much more of a status than you might suppose. Yes, they were not at the same level as marriage, but the words on screen do suggest that Antonio in Twelfth Night might have grounds for pursuing a more fulfilling relationship with Sebastian than modern audiences might realise. Thus, at the end of the play, is he entitled to feel a little bit let down and isolated when the man he loves, Sebastian, rushes into a marriage with a woman he barely knows? Returning to the comparison. So both Antonios take great risks because of the men they love, and they both insist on lending money. In The Merchant of Venice, the money is to be used for a noble cause. In Act 1, Scene 1, Bassanio gushes about this extraordinary woman called Portia, who perhaps has signalled in the past through her eyes that she might be prepared to consider his love. He cannot possibly pitch up to declare love without some visible signs of his own wealth and position. So in The Merchant of Venice, Antonio is asked for money. But in Twelfth Night, haply your eyes shall light upon some toy you have desire to purchase. So while sightseeing the relics of the city, Sebastian might want to buy some tacky souvenirs, so he'd better take Antonio's purse with him. Now, of course, the sums are very different. In Merchant of Venice, Antonio borrows 3,000 ducats from Shylock, by some estimates around $500,000 in today's money. The amount of money in Antonio's purse in Twelfth Night is likely to be comparatively pilfering, but not so pilfering that, later in Act 3, Scene 4, he gets very upset when he thinks it is Sebastian who is refusing to return the purse to him. However, a comparison between the two texts does emphasise the strangeness in Twelfth Night's Antonio's insisting that Sebastian takes his purse. Why? It's hardly as though he's going to use it for anything important or essential. And does this act emphasise his own desperate loneliness? Whereas Antonio in Merchant of Venice is doing something genuinely kind and potentially self-sacrificial, Antonio in Twelfth Night seems to be foisting himself on a largely indifferent Sebastian's attention. Of course, Antonio in Twelfth Night is not a main character in the same way as his namesake in Merchant of Venice. Nonetheless, his appearance and unexplained devotion to Sebastian provides another cog in the confusing web of love and attraction that is Twelfth Night. Writing in her essay The Orchestration of Twelfth Night within Harold Bloom's edited Modern Critical Interpretations of the Play, Jean Howard suggests that one role of Antonio is to draw attention through contrast to Malvolio's self-centred arrogance. She writes, "His function is to embody honest and selfless service. He is neither time for affected postures of the sort that afflict Malvolio, nor a nature easy with disguise of any sort. Great, therefore, is the contrast between Antonio's selflessness and Malvolio's peevish and selfish machinations." This idea of viewing characters relatively has a great deal of merit in Twelfth Night, and also helps spotlight Olivia and Orsino's self-indulgence when faced with someone like Viola, who is in a genuinely scary position. However, as my examples here indicate, I wonder just how fair it is to pick out Malvolio ahead of some of the other characters in the play. I would have thought peevish and selfish would also be perfect adjectives to apply to Orsino.
Give me your hand, dear viewers and subscribers. Fare you well. Commend me to your honourable wives and partners. This has been a Schofield and Shakespeare production exploring Act 3, Scenes 2 to 3 of Twelfth Night. Thank you for watching.